Hi, and thank you for checking out my video. I'm excited to be part of the third Atheists of Facebook online convention. My name is Rich. I'm one half of Couple of Atheists, the blog I co-author with my fiancée Allison. And today I would like to talk about lack of belief and the problem of God. I want to focus more on theism because I think that's where the problem really lies. Now, for me, my atheism is a conclusion. The God hypothesis runs prior, and I do try to get down to what they mean by God. And I think it's a very important question. How many times have you heard a Christian say, oh, well, you're not talking about my God? After you go through a whole spiel, I think if you vague definition, God is love, God is being, God just is. Those aren't helpful. So they evade the question and they try to get us bogged down into a particular definition of atheism. So of course I do lack a belief in all gods, and I think that definition works. It's when we get down to a particular God where that definition no longer functions. And I have various reasons for disbelieving and rejecting all the concepts of God. But basically my contention is, at the very base of it, after you strip away all the attributes, all the hand-wavy arguments, the very concept of God is incoherent and unintelligible. And God as a proper name is completely meaningless. Now Christians will give you all kind of different excuses. Oh, that's not my God. You're not talking about my God. You're talking about the Sky Daddy and all this other things. That's not the God of Christianity, which, by the way, Jesus did go into heaven and up into the sky, and he does have a beard, but we'll leave that for another day. And the Christians will argue that their God is pretty much the only God. It's just an assumption that our culture has just accepted. This is the only God. But even within Christianity, there's very differing concepts, very differing definitions of God, the way they use the word. If you take the theologian Paul Tillich, he argues against theism altogether, but yet he believes in God. So you get very different, varying definitions. So I typically stick with the classical theistic version of God, the omni-God, that mainstream Christianity holds. That's the one the popular, that's the one everyone tends to believe in. God is all present, omnipresent, all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful. And it's very different from the God of the philosophers, and I want to make that distinction too, and I hope I can do that justice here. Basically, when we start talking about gods, they want to try to bog us down to a particular concept, a particular definition of atheism. And that's not going to work, because atheism depends on what we're talking about when we start addressing a certain God. Now, of course, I think at the very base, they're all incoherent, the definitions of God. But that doesn't mean that these other arguments are not important. I think they're very important strategically to show the inconsistency and incoherency of the concept of God. We can pinpoint how these cannot be consistently applied from here to here in many of the cases. And I think that's a very strong argument to show. And that's why Christians, don't want to try to tie down their particular God. They tend to stick with the mystery concept of their God. They like the mystery. But yet they'll be the first one to tell you what this mystery's will is. I mean, adding information to a mystery takes away from the mystery. But, that's part of the apologetic game here. They try to skirt any kind of spotlight on themselves here. But I don't want to talk about the thousands of other gods that they might say, oh, you just lack a belief. Yeah, we can sit here and go through all the other gods I don't believe in. Zeus, Thor, we can get into, thousands of dead gods that are no longer worshipped. That's not going to get us anywhere. That's not a very interesting conversation to have. I want to talk about the God that particular theist at that time is holding, what he believes in. That's where we're going to really get to the issue. Otherwise, we're just running in circles and we're not going to get anywhere with this. Now, I can allow for different concepts of God. These doctrinal disputes over what constitutes the Christian God versus this Christian God versus Allah, those don't concern me. I'm just worried about what the person I'm talking to, what they believe in. Now, people have worshipped things throughout history, anything from fire to the sun to snakes. And I believe in the sun. I believe in snakes. I believe they exist. There's a tribe that worships two plates. One male, one female, husband and wife. I believe in plates. Now, do I think they're gods? No. That's the concept that I was talking about, being inconsistent and incoherent. There's no reason for this to apply here. It doesn't add any information to what we're talking about. It just muddies the waters. A lot of them do have similar concepts, though, in terms of they impose their will on mankind. They tend to be supernatural. And let me just briefly address supernatural. The problem with supernatural is it's not a term that has much meaning in itself either. Supernatural, a lot of times they'll say it is things outside of nature. A lot of things that are outside of nature, that we thought were outside of the laws of nature, once we're discovered that they work within nature, they just become part of the laws of nature. They just were not known to us at the time. They just get subsumed into the laws of nature. So there's no supernatural per se. Anything outside the laws of nature, that's pure speculation. That's just typical religious thinking. And that again is going to need a lot of explaining on the theist part, and it's a part that they resort to faith. And then that's a whole other topic, because faith is another issue I have where religion fails. Another one is a disembodied consciousness, and deists go to this route too with disembodied consciousness. There's no reason to assume that such a thing is possible. Everything we know of consciousness, intelligence, all comes from a material, physical, functioning brain. We know how these things can be damaged. We know how these things can change. We know how they work, how they interact. There's no reason to believe that there's some ghost behind them, ghost in the machine, running things, dictating what we do, making decisions for us, that runs our body. This is the physical process of the brain. The higher power, that's way too vague to even address. Higher power just means, other powerful forces stuff. Power compared to what we think is power. Given what we know of power, we could say omnipotent. What we know of, life, we can say immortality. These higher powers, they're just another way of just saying, God without the religious attachment. That's what I found. Now, in atheism, basically denies all of these applications to deity and applies all of these other terms that get applied to mean God, such as omnipotent and things, and these are really issues that need to be addressed. So I'm fairly confident in saying that due to my rejection of the God of classical theism, the omnipresent, the omnipotent, omni-God, a fortiori, that kind of rules out any of these other concepts that people can come up with, because a lot of them have some of these features. And they all run similar in that sense. And it's because of those that I can roll out any ones that people might come, well, hey, maybe it's not this particular thing. But now if you're talking about another, God outside of time interacting within space and time, then you're going to run into the same problems that make your God concept incoherent to begin with. So now again, as I mentioned, when we step away from theism in general and narrow our focus onto Christianity in general, we need to disabuse ourselves of this cultural conditioning that that the God of Christianity or the Abrahamic tradition in general is just the God. That's it. That when you say God, that's it. That's the only God that counts. The only one people are talking about. It's the only one they mean. But as I've already said, that within it, their own religion, there's different concepts. Within Christianity, especially, the God with a capital G is a particular religious construct belonging to a particular set of religious traditions. Now, when you try to apply these concepts against other even denominations of Christianity, you run into inconsistencies and the like that make it where we can't simply say, hey, this is what, when I say I'm an atheist, this is what I'm talking about, because you are obviously a Christian and this is your God. We can't make that assumption. That is up for the Christian to decide what they are talking about as far as a God. And then it's our position to now make sure that it's applied consistently and that it's internally coherent. And as I said, they all fail at that stated goal. Now when we get to the God of the philosophers, there's so many problems with this one where they basically spent all their time trying to rescue their God from the omni-God problems. Now, the fact should not be ignored that the God of philosophers is quite different between this and the God of the common Christian. And this is no accident. Of course, I can't get into the treatment this topic deserves here, but the discrepancies are obvious enough. They would be two entirely different gods altogether if it wasn't for careful placement of just enough Christianity by these Christian philosophers to keep a familiar feel for them. Not only do these apologist attempts fail, but they often just conflate the problem. I mean, this vague theoretical deity that they try to push out there as the same God of Christianity simply isn't adequate to be the object of worship that Christianity demands. They strip away all the anthropomorphic qualities and just pay lip service to things like this is the personal God who loves us, but leaves it at that and doesn't actually offer anything past that. The actual concept of God is left separate. It's as if the 18th century philosopher Baron de Holbach said, the more we consider the theological God, the more impossible and contradictory he will appear. And if you'll pardon me to use another quote here from Sigmund Freud's The Future of an Illusion, philosophers stretch the meaning of words until they retain scarcely anything of their original sense. By calling God something vague, or some vague abstraction which they have created for themselves, they as deists, as believers before the world, they may even pride themselves on having attained a higher and purer idea of God, although their God is nothing but an insubstantial shadow and no longer the mighty personality of religious doctrine. So in light of this, most theists, and deists even, have just abandoned arguing for their God altogether and just hiding behind the mystery part of it and started attacking atheism through materialism and naturalism in general. And that's where the problem comes in, because they want to lock people down into definitions without offering any of their own. Now, of course, a common objection by theists is just because atheists don't understand what God means doesn't mean he doesn't exist. This would be true, except that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the concept being internally incoherent. It's not simply a matter of misunderstanding. See, religious language, it's my contention that such terminology, it's only useful in religious language. And it's wholly unintelligible and ultimately does not speak of anything to reality. Think of how the Force makes sense in Star Wars, but it doesn't make sense in reality. How could you explain it? It doesn't do anything. But in Star Wars, it makes perfect sense. Oh, how come he didn't, use his Force push, or if Luke used Force lightning? That would make sense because that's the dark side of the Force. It makes perfect sense in these abstract imaginary worlds. That's one of the beautiful things about imagination, actually. It's something I encourage. But when you try to apply those things to reality and they don't match up, and you continue to try to fit reality into these abstracts like this, that's where you get into trouble. And that's where religion fails the most. The problem is that due to the nature of indoctrination, most believers refuse to even realize that these are serious, serious issues that undermine their very religion, which is the foundation of their entire worldview. They simply just sweep it away as needs to be taken on faith. Well, unfortunately, that's not how we do things. That's not how things work, and you get into some serious, serious trouble doing that. So, in closing, I just want to address, when I ask, what do you mean when you say God? I am not trying to put you in a spot, not trying to hold you to a specific opinion or a definition. I seriously do want to know. God is being, God is not being. God can be known, God can't be known. There's negative theology, positive theology. We should worship and fear God. We should have a loving relationship with God. And that's just within Christianity. And you have the audacity to tell me I am being dishonest when I ask a simple question of what you mean when you use the term God. Because all I really want to know is just, what the fuck are you talking about?